Hello and welcome to Bike Social and to episode 10 already of our Better Riding series brought to you by Bennetts and Honda Motorcycles UK. Well, we all want to be better at everything we do, right? So surely the same applies for riding your bike. This is a collection of videos and articles full of advice and even drills. And it doesn't matter if you're a newcomer to riding or you've been doing it daily for the last 30 years, there's always something new to learn and to be better at. And to do so, we've teamed up with professional motorbike coach Mark McVeigh, an experienced rider coach, ex-MotoGP engineer, riding academy owner for 20 years, and the inventor of Moto DNA rider training tech. Mark's taught more than 10,000 riders to be smarter, to be safer, and to be more confident. And hopefully he's joining me now. G'day, Mark. How are you?
G'day, Michael. Very well. Thank you very much. How's yourself?
Yeah, super job. Excuse the sort of tomato-esque appearance. I was out at an event all day out in the sunshine yesterday. Anyway, let's get to it. Mark, what are we going to be talking about today?
Okay, today it's emergency braking and how to nail your emergency stop every time. So teaching so many riders, we see a lot of misunderstanding about, the correct emergency braking technique. And all my training is post-license. So the riders have actually already had their training and, for their license before they come to me, but still, not quite 100%.
Well, yeah, I was going to say, look, the first question surely is how many, I don't know if you've got a percentage here, but how many riders do you see doing a good emergency stop?
Yeah, well, I guess if you define emergency stop, it's kind of like a controlled maximum effort stop, performed to avoid a collision or an obstacle that appears suddenly without warning. So that's kind of the goal, right? And even though these riders are doing a drill, they know it's going to happen, right? It's still it can be a surprise doing the drill. So roughly about 20% of the riders perform an effective, you would say, emergency stop. And, that's despite technology like ABS. What I'm saying is like most riders are kind of still tentative with the front brake. They've got this sort of perceived risk of locking the front tire. And, but the thing is, whenever you're surprised or under stress, you'll always drop to that level of training. So that's the thing to remember.
Can't believe that. Just 1 in 5. That's amazing. I've been, in all the years that you've been teaching and all the people that you've taught, then I bet you've seen some surprises with emergency stops, haven't you?
Yes. From, people falling off. That's, that happens occasionally. The other one is like front end pogos, the bike's bouncing up and down because, the riders kind of put the brake on. They're kind of all, energized up with adrenaline and then the bike reacts in a way that they've never experienced before. And they kind of let the brake off and then go again. So the bike's bouncing around. We see swerving. Seen plenty of front end skids, with riders that didn't have ABS. But my favorite story is a lady that actually didn't do an emergency stop during an emergency stop drill. And we asked her to come back around saying, what happened? You actually didn't stop. She says, I can't reach my front brake lever. It's like, okay, so... and it turns out she'd never used her front brake because she could never use the front brake lever. So that was, that was probably the best story. Yeah. But, so we need to practice these stops, is somewhere in a car park, build that confidence up. And, we'll go through a few tips, of course, but you can't teach everything in a 20-minute video. So, head over to motorbikecoach.com, for regular riding tips. And before we start, we'll assume that everybody's kind of got ABS on their bike because it's so common. So we'll just kind of make that disclaimer up front.
Yeah, sure. No, good idea. And look, it's such an important topic to discuss and it can make the difference, can't it? Let's get cracking. What should we discuss first, Mr. McVeigh?
Yeah, so first we'll talk a little bit about bike balance and grip, okay? So it's really useful to understand, from all your riding, but especially emergency braking and, and weight distribution. So, we're kind of, if we run this graphic through, you can see the weight bias changing, as the rider accelerates and brakes and goes through the corner. And we'll just kind of bring that back to the start and play it through again. So you can see the rider's kind of on a neutral throttle here. So there's most of the whites on the back, 60% on the back and then 40 on the front. And then as the rider kind of comes into the corner, they'll go to the brake and the white shifts to the front. So there's more kind of like 70% of white on the front. And of course, the main contributor to white or the main contributor to grip is that white on the front of the tire. So it's really important to kind of understand that, especially from an emergency braking perspective.
Yeah, okay, I kind of get that, but have you got a sort of an easier way to understand grip?
Yeah, well, I guess if you have like an eraser, like a rubber, so you're rubbing out your pencil, whatever, and you drag that across the table and you kind of feel that it grips the table. And then if you like actually get above it and push down vertically on that and try and drag that rubber across, it actually won't move. And that's the same logic, apply on your motorbike. When you put that kind of vertical load on your bike, you get that significant grip increase. And then, if you push on your motorbike tire too, you can kind of see what happens. The tire sort of get that kind of flattens out. As the tire gets the weight on it, and then it directs between the road, and that sort of key to grip is that building that load progressively on the contact patch, and that progressiveness is something we'll talk about a lot. And you should apply that through all your riding inputs, throttle, brake, steering. And normally the problems arise when the rider kind of overloads the tire, by grabbing the brake or throttle, that type of thing, rather than applying it smoothly and gradually.
Shall we explore in a little bit more detail? Perhaps we can break those elements down. Start with the brakes.
Yeah. So if we talk about the front brake first, and this is a cracking video. You can see here slow-mo, looking on the back tire. There's obviously no weight on that back tire, and it's perfectly round, and there's no grip on it either. But then if you look at how flat the front tire is, the amount of weight on there, the amount of grip is just is huge. So it's really important to kind of understand that, the contribution that the front brake makes to the bike. Nothing will slow you down faster than the front brake, and that's the kind of thing to consider first.
How much engine braking or the rear brake is contributing to slowing the bike down now?
Yeah, rear brake, listen, it contributes very little, and it depends on the bike. If it's a long and low cruiser, it's going to contribute more than a kind of shorter, taller bike. It might be 10, 15%, that type of thing. But, the rear brake is prone to kind of locking, or if you have ABS, ABS triggering. But it is important to use the rear brake in emergency braking and the timing of it, and we'll explore that a little bit later.
Of course, that's why you see smaller discs on the rear and bigger discs on the front.
Exactly right, yeah.
Mark, what happens to the clutch? What the clutch when you're doing an emergency brake? Are you supposed to kind of grab both at the same time, or is it, you just, because you'll just stall the engine, surely?
Yeah, well, that's a good question too. So we teach our riders to pull the clutch in pretty much straight away. And the reason for that, you can see emergency stop here with this rider. And the reason for that is, and you can see his clutch in, is the bike's actually still revving. And you see he's got the lever in, and around 15 to 20% of our students have some level of throttle on when they do their emergency stop. So obviously, if you've got the throttle on and you got the brake on, you're actually driving against the front brake. So that's a big problem. And, these riders are, 15, 20% of them are doing it in a drill. So in a real emergency, the percentage is likely to rise, proportional to the level of surprise, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So obviously it reduces the braking effectiveness, pushing the bike on instead of slowing down. And then the bike wants to pitch less. So you've actually got less grip on the front tire as well. And then that's triggering the ABS. So essentially what you're doing is you're just extending your stopping distance massively. So yeah, we just tell the riders, just get the clutch in straight away. And, the look on riders' faces, like I say, 1 in 5 riders are doing this, and they've stopped, I'm standing there, they've got the clutch in, the bike's revving its head off, and they're kind of like, deer in the headlights, but I'm going, it's cool because you got the clutch in, the bike's not going anywhere. And then they kind of get it. And what we want to do is, teach them, when they're like super proficient, then it's not so much an issue. But especially at the start as you're practicing, it's good practice just to get that clutch in straight away.
Yeah, you shouldn't be embarrassed about that, should you? Because if you stop short of the hazard of the car, of the deer, of the whatever it is in the road, then it doesn't matter what the bike's doing, whether it's off or on, or you're safe. Mark, have you got any
100%.
other sort of good tips for a good emergency stop?
Yep. So another thing that we teach is, covering the front brake, and it's super important thing to talk about here. Obviously, you can see we've got 2 fingers on, and the key thing is, if you're worried, go to the brake. Have the brake covered, be ready. That's the first thing. And then the second thing is that, many of the licensing courses are teaching riders to kind of have all their fingers on the brake. And to be honest, I think this is like a sort of legacy back to the police rider's handbook and maybe drum brakes. But if you've got 4 fingers on the handlebar, on the front brake, you're not actually holding on to the handlebar properly. You've kind of got your thumb hooked on there, as you can see here. So, you may still have to swerve. You may have bumps or potholes. So, that's why we say 2 fingers for the front brake. And that can, if you're covering the brake, that can save precious, fractions of a second.
We learnt about it, didn't we, in a previous episode about hazard, when we were looking at hazard perception and the reaction time for a distance and the movement,
right.
But the time it takes from if you've even got a full, closed throttle, let me do that, to getting those 2 fingers over, that's, that could be half a second, and that could make all the difference. Engine braking, I mentioned it a little bit ago. Let me feed you that question one more time. Does engine braking help in an emergency stop?
Again, it's kind of one of these myths, and people are kind of getting distracted from using the front brake. If you got to face into, if you're afraid of the front brake, you got to lean into that and face it and master that front brake. Nothing will slow you down quicker. If you're banging down the gearbox, and the engine's revving its head off, it's kind of not really what we want to be achieving, and again, that can make the bike kind of unstable or trigger ABS. So yeah, it's really when people ask that question, kind of gently guide them back to the front brake.
Yeah, exactly. You don't want to be concentrating on anything else but the front brake, do you? And speaking about sort of the levers, the brakes and the brake, the front brake and the clutch levers, a lot of modern bikes, they have adjustable span, don't they? And presumably, you must see a lot of aftermarket levers as well. So the position of those levers, that must be really important too.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the old lady story, that was kind of extreme, but I see varying degrees. Like, I don't really see people with their levers set up perfectly. They're kind of like as they come from the shop. But yeah, have a play with them. And, I've got a good reel here. I think we spoke about this guy before, and I was just alarmed about, it was a really high performance bike. I was alarmed about how long it took him to stop. And it's just suspicious. And I'm just looking, and he had a little bit of an endo near the end there. It's just something not quite right here. And, we started looking at his levers, going, okay, he's got a short lever on here. What's going on here? And, it's essentially, when you look at the lever, this is the pivot point here. And he's got this lever, but he's using the 2 fingers. So he's kind of pulling the lever here. So, the distance from here to here is, that's quite short. And the OEM levers are obviously much longer, and you're pulling on them near the end of the lever. So it's really important to pay attention to your levers. And in this case, the guy, big, strong, strapping lad, and he couldn't trigger the ABS, so it's really important to pay attention, especially women, because, their hands are generally smaller. So yeah, pay attention to your levers and your brake, your foot lever too, brake pedal too, and yeah, it'll pay dividends.
Yeah, exactly. You've got to give yourself every advantage, haven't you? You've got to position yourself or give yourself the best opportunity to stop as quickly as possible. But Mark, a lot of motorcycling, we talk about body position, whether you're on a sports bike, a tour, or an adventure bike, even a scooter. all of those variants aside, is there sort of a set position that would optimize, that would make emergency braking even better?
Yeah, well, body position's important, and I guess if you think about, most road bikes can stop at 1G, and that's kind of the same feeling as doing a push up. That's on your arms, you'll kind of feel that kind of type of force, and that's a significant force. So you do not want to be kind of having that all through your arms. So it's important to kind of sit, and hold the tank with your legs, your thighs. That's an important thing to kind of understand. And as you start getting your emergency stop, building up those G forces as you practice, you'll probably find yourself having to do that. So that's important. And then obviously, you need to keep your head up. That's a big thing. I see people kind of, tilting their head down. So really important to keep your head up, on the hazard, looking where you want to go, and the balance as well. And when your head's up, you've kind of got good balance as well. So that's an important part of it.
You said arms slightly bent, did you? So rather than locking them.
Yeah, listen, if if you're supporting your body with your at the tank with your thighs, then you can afford to kind of have your arms slightly bent, and that's better for controlling the bike. If your arms are straight, that's not really good for steering the bike if you've got to steer around something at some point. So it's good just to try and get into that correct body position.
Okay, and what about the road surface? So if the road was wet or a bit mucky, that's going to make a difference, surely, when you're grabbing onto that front brake.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll go through the sort of process for practicing later, and part of it is doing it in different road surfaces. Obviously start in the dry and build your confidence, but in the real world, we've got gravel, we've got wet, slippery situations. So most bikes have got ABS, and that's important, but we've still got to be able to have the correct technique, if that makes sense.
But if my bike has got ABS, then do I need to worry about emergency stops as much, or do I apply the same pressure? How about sort of squeezing the lever? What kind of?
Well, ABS, it's just the tire's not going to lock up. That's essentially what's going to happen. But the rider still needs to squeeze the lever, and I mean it is. There's a lot of theories around, well, can the rider outperform ABS and all this type of stuff? But I mean, seriously, on the road, the grip level's unknown, and ABS is like one of the best safety additions to a motorbike, hands down.
It's so important, isn't it? I think it's just a case of just grabbing it as quickly as you can and as hard as you can. And that's the big tip there. But and we talked a little bit about gears earlier on. Should we touch a little bit more on that right now?
Yeah, so gears, the primary goal is to get this, to stop as soon as possible. But, eventually we want to build into your technique that you are going down the gears, so that, if you have, as soon as you've stopped, you're kind of ready then, is there a car behind you that's been paying attention and is going to present a new risk to you? So, as soon as you're stopped, you really kind of need to be mindful of, okay, I need to get out of the way here, or what's behind me, what's my situational awareness like. So you've managed to avoid what you're emergency braking for, but you get into first gear and then get out of the way. So that's the thing with the gears. But the gears certainly are not for slowing you down, which a lot of people, hear that a lot of the time. It's the front brake.
Go on then, Mark. There must be some other elements to this. I'm sure you've got lots more, but what else is an important part of emergency braking?
Yeah, well, reaction time is probably the big one. You don't, in the real world, you don't know when you're going to need to do the emergency stop. So, your total stopping distance will include these extra elements of, perception time and reaction time. So, perception time being the time to realize, oh, there's a problem here, and that's roughly about a second. And then reaction time is kind of the distance traveled before you actually physically start braking, and that's roughly a second. So that's 2 seconds before you've actually started adjusting the speed of the bike. And, at 100 kilometers an hour, that's nearly, 30 meters for 1 second. So that could be 60 meters before you even start to brake.
Funny, I was on my way into the office today on a sports bike, and I had this not a similar issue, but I came around a semi-blind corner. I was only doing about 35 miles an hour, but again, there was a queue of traffic in front. One person was wanting to turn into a side junction, but I'd seen it in enough time, and it was still a grab of the brake, but I had enough of a gap in front of me, and it wakes you up, doesn't it? It makes you alert.
Does.
Go on then, Mark. You've got an abundance of data, I assume. Have you got any breaking data that we can have a look at?
Oh yeah, we love our data. So yeah, we've got our digital academy, and what part of the system is we measure the emergency braking. So if we jump into the platform here, and you can see a couple of different graphs. So we've got G-force, which is on the vertical scale, and then on the bottom we've got distance or time. Okay, so the green one here is the coach, and the yellow one's the student. And if we look at the two different lines, so the green one here, you see how steep that is. That's really the rate of application and how quickly you squeeze the brake lever. Okay, so you can see how the difference in the student, is a much flatter. Okay, and then the next thing to think about is the progressiveness. And progressiveness is keep building the brake pressure until you stop. Okay, so you can see on the green one, it's totally progressive. Once the brake pressure is applied, it goes all the way up until a stop. Okay, and then compare that to the student. Again, not so progressive. So they've kind of let the brake pressure off, and then they kind of come on again. And this is really typical. Like I said, the riders kind of get a bit of a fright, and they let the brake off, and then they kind of go again. And of course, when you're doing that, you're taking the weight off the tire. So that's important to understand. And then this one is the peak G, so 1.2, and this is just a road bike. And then the student, again, they're about 0.7 of a G. So they're the kind of things that we can see on the data, and it's really makes it very obvious what's happening with the emergency braking between the different students. And if we click on another one, you can see here's another student. Like really, the progressiveness is hugely different, as the riders kind of come off the brake and then on again, and they've reached about sort of 0.6 of a G. So yeah, you can't beat the data. It tells the story. The only thing that we're not kind of showing there is kind of that initial application, as well. So how quickly you can get to the brakes. And that was through the, covering the brakes. That's kind of how that all works.
So in that example there, Mark, what sort of speed would they have been doing? The difference between the student and the person who stopped 6 meters shorter than the student?
Yeah, that's a good point. So the algorithm kind of rewards the speed because, if we get a rider coming doing 30 miles an hour versus 60, it's much easier to do at 30. So the algorithm takes that into account as well. But yeah, we try and get the riders to build up. So, start from 30 and get it up to, realistic road speed, so 70, 80 miles an hour. So we're covering ourselves for the real world, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, exactly, because you don't know when you really don't know when there's going to be an emergency stop situation. Do you? You could be doing 10 or 70 or anywhere in between. Mark,
Exactly.
we've talked about a lot of different elements. If we bring everything we've spoken about together, what does it look like? What should it look like?
Yeah, so the technique, it's kind of like a bit of a matrix, so we start slow and easy, give yourself a baseline and kind of gradually build from there. So step one is practicing, from your normal throttle grip position and use the front brake only. So use a speed that's comfortable for you. You don't want to break, lap records in the first go. Just take it easy, give yourself a good baseline. So, get up to a speed that's comfortable for you, close the throttle and initiate that braking. Same time, like we said, pull the clutch in and apply that initial pressure. That makes the bike pitch forward, putting that weight on the front tire, then squeeze that brake lever progressively until you come to a complete stop. So that's kind of the baseline. And then what we want you to do is practice this over and over until you're regularly sort of triggering your ABS And the ABS essentially is the braking threshold of the tire, okay? So that's, and it's a safe way to do it. So it's a good technique.
How quickly should I squeeze the brake? Is it a case of just, grabbing everything you need instantly?
Yeah, well, that's a good point. And you've got a little graphic here. You can see the difference, between the left and the right. I'll just play it again because it's over in a second. So the left one squeeze and the right one still, hasn't finished squeezing. So it's, your bikes get ABS, so the tire's not going to lock, okay? So what I teach my students is practice to the point where you actually grab the brake. So what I want them to do is to be too abrupt, okay? And they're basically trigger the ABS because the bike hasn't had time to pitch forward. So they're grabbing the front brake really quickly before the bike's pitched forward. So there's no little weight or grip on the front tire, and that triggers the ABS. So once that happens, then that's too much. And then you can actually start to work backwards and slow down your technique a fraction because, you don't want to trigger that ABS because that, increases your stopping distance to a degree. So it's really trying to get there without triggering the ABS. So, once you're consistent and their technique is intuitive, then you can kind of move on. And what I like the riders to do next is then repeat the same thing again, but from covering the front brake, because that's a different muscle memory, right? You've got your hand over the front brake. Practice the timing of this, and then repeat. And then next thing to do is start bringing in the rear brake. And the rear brake, especially if you can time the rear brake that it's just on before the front brake, it has a kind of effect of flattening the bike out and kind of sucking the bike down under the ground. And it's quite a powerful thing. So again, once you're happy with that technique, you're triggering the ABS then. That's another benchmark. And then you start to increase the speeds. So let's do it, maybe you start off at 30 mile an hour, go 50. Do the same thing. Then let's go 70, do the same thing. Repeat all those things so you've kind of got a full matrix. And then to finish off, do it in the wet. The road surface is not always perfect. So, it's really just getting all those skills. So it might seem like a simple thing, but when you bring in all these different elements, then, that's the way to be ready and have that emergency brake and intuitive and ready for all occasions.
Such an important tool, isn't it? We can't emphasize that enough. Planning ahead, making sure that you're covered, but being confident and efficient with that progressiveness was the word you used, wasn't it, earlier on?
Exactly.
Shall we summarize what we've been talking about?
Yeah, so I guess, we want to be intuitive, like any other motorbike skill, get your training to get the correct technique. And then, we remember it's only 20 hours of training to get your license and, 10,000 hours for mastery. So that's a lot of practice.
Mark, as usual, plenty of detail, plenty of information, plenty of advice, and it is so important to heed, of course. What are we going to be talking about next time?
Yeah, the next one's about straight line hazard avoidance for the real world.
Awesome. I cannot wait for that. Plenty of more advice and tips and brilliance, I'm sure. Mark, you deserved a beer. Go and enjoy yourself. Thanks again for your time. We'll see you next time.
All right. See ya. Thanks, Michael.
Wonderful. Thank you to Mark McVeigh, motorbikecoach.com. Thank you also to Honda Motorcycles UK for supporting this series. Mark and I will be back next time to discuss how to practice your straight line hazard avoidance. In the meantime, there's plenty of other episodes in this series, so don't forget to check out all of those better riding episodes. They're all in a playlist on our YouTube channel. I've got 3 more places of interest for you to get some advice or to ask questions or just sort of hang out as a motorcyclist and enjoy this incredible world that we live in. So firstly, search for Bennetts Bike Club, which is our new community website. It's a bit like a sort of a Facebook forum and it's full of experts answering all sorts of motorcycle related questions that you can rely on. A similar offering can be found on our private Facebook group, and that's called Bennetts Bike Social. And finally, how about becoming a Bike Social member? So if you insure your bike directly with Bennetts, you get it for free. It's free access, and that's access to over 200 deals, discounts, offers, competitions, and such like. But you can also become a member even if you're not insured by Bennetts. It'll just cost you £6 a month or £60 a year. Thank you very much for your time, and we'll see you next time. Honda Motorcycles are supporting this series because safety is one of their key business pillars. and their quest for safety inspires their innovations in products, technology, and education, which is why they're committed to achieving zero traffic fatalities involving Honda mobility products worldwide by 2050.